The story begins in the 1600s in North Africa, when Solomon led a group of pirates in a raid on an island belonging to the Ottoman Empire. After wiping out everyone who stood in their way, he and his men pushed deeper into the central fortress, where countless treasures were rumored to be hidden. As they advanced toward the main chamber, the group was suddenly ambushed by hordes of bizarre creatures emerging from the mirrors lining the hallway. One of the soldiers panicked and immediately turned to flee. But after only a few steps, he was struck down on the spot by Solomon without a moment of hesitation. The remaining men continued toward the treasure room. The instant Solomon stepped inside, the door behind him suddenly slammed shut. At that moment, a dark entity known as Devil Reaper slowly revealed itself upon the throne ahead. It declared that Solomon's soul had been cursed by greed and the countless sins of his past. Devil Reaper offered him a pact, demanding that Solomon surrender his own soul in exchange. However, Solomon immediately refused, enraging the entity, which lunged at him with a terrifying demonic sword. Refusing to accept a fate of being dragged into hell, Solomon fought back fiercely before leaping through a window to escape. 1 year later, he returned to England and lived in seclusion within a monastery. Solomon chose to abandon violence and donated all his wealth to the church in hopes of finding redemption. One afternoon, the priest came to see Solomon and explained that ever since he arrived at the monastery, he had been plagued by strange dreams, as though darkness were engulfing the place. Unable to endure the unease any longer, the priest was forced to ask Solomon to leave the monastery so peace could return. Solomon was completely devastated, because now even this sacred place could not accept him. After packing his belongings, he quietly departed and began wandering once again. Most of the lands he traveled through were consumed by an atmosphere of gloom and death. Some villages had nearly collapsed from famine and spreading disease. In other places, he witnessed people being executed simply for being suspected of witchcraft. During one chance encounter, Solomon met the Crowthorne family while they were traveling toward the Promised Land. Realizing that he was not a bad person, they kindly offered to let Solomon join them on their journey. However, not wanting to burden anyone, he refused their offer. Later that evening, while Solomon was resting, 3 bandits suddenly appeared and held him at knife point. After searching through his belongings and finding nothing valuable, the men became enraged and brutally beat Solomon without mercy. Because he had sworn to abandon violence, Solomon did not fight back and silently endured the assault. As a result, he was quickly beaten unconscious. At that moment, memories from his past began to resurface, revealing that Solomon was actually the son of a wealthy lord. But since he was the younger son, most of the family's wealth and lands had been given to his older brother Marcus. Solomon also had no desire to become a monk as his father wished, causing the relationship between them to grow increasingly strained. During an argument with Marcus, Solomon accidentally shoved his brother, causing him to slip and fall from a cliff. Terrified and lacking the courage to face his father, Solomon chose to run away from home and eventually became the man he was now. At that moment, another nightmare of Devil Reaper suddenly struck, jolting Solomon awake. To his surprise, he found himself beside the Crowthorne family, who had been taking care of him. Mr. Crowthorne reassured Solomon that he had nothing to fear, because he would be safe with them. He also reminded his daughter Meredith to continue looking after their special guest. Not long afterward, the group stopped beside a stream and set up camp for the night. Not wanting to become a burden, Solomon offered to help with whatever tasks he could manage. Seeing this, Catherine encouraged him to rest until he had fully recovered. During dinner that evening, Solomon told the Crowthorne family about the brutal wars he had fought in and explained why he had chosen to abandon the path of bloodshed in search of redemption. Meredith was deeply fascinated by Solomon's stories. In contrast, her brother Edward seemed rather uncomfortable, as he despised war above all else. Mr. Crowthorne explained that he too had once served in battle, so he understood the guilt Solomon carried within him. Over the following days, Solomon continued traveling with the Crowthorne family toward the Promised Land. Throughout the journey, Meredith often spent her free time repairing Solomon's clothes, and the distance between them gradually grew smaller. The youngest child, Samuel, deeply admired Solomon and constantly begged him to teach him a few sword fighting skills. While training and traveling together, the two suddenly spotted a village not far away. When they arrived, they quickly realized the village had been reduced to ruins. Every house had been burned to the ground and countless corpses littered the earth. Witnessing such a horrifying scene, Mr. Crowthorne believed that only dark forces could have caused such devastation. Just as the group was preparing to leave, Meredith suddenly discovered a little girl hiding nearby with a terrified expression on her face. That evening, Mr. Crowthorne gently asked the girl what had happened in the village. She explained that the villagers had once captured a witch and attempted to burn her alive. But it had been a terrible mistake, because the flames could not destroy the witch, and afterward she returned to slaughter the entire village in revenge. After hearing the story, the Crowthorne family decided to pray together for the souls of the dead. However, the little girl repeatedly avoided joining them whenever they prayed, causing Solomon to grow suspicious. Suddenly, an idea flashed through his mind. Solomon took Edward's cross necklace and held it near the girl to test her reaction. In that instant, the girl revealed a sinister smile before suddenly lunging at Solomon. He quickly fought back and forced the witch to reveal her true form. Even so, before escaping, the witch suddenly left a strange mark on Meredith's arm and transformed into a flock of crows before vanishing. The following morning, a nearby village was suddenly attacked by an army of cultists led by a figure known as Masked Rider. Within a short time, the entire village was consumed by flames, while the villagers were taken captive. Using a form of dark magic, Masked Rider transformed the strongest men into warriors who served under his command. Several days later, Solomon and the Crowthorne family set up camp in a forest. Solomon could not hide his concern over the mark on Meredith's arm. However, she insisted that she felt no pain or any unusual symptoms. Early the next morning, while everyone was still asleep, Samuel hurriedly woke Solomon and told him he had heard strange noises nearby. Solomon immediately went to investigate and discovered Masked Rider's army attacking passing travelers. Meanwhile, another group of soldiers had already found the Crowthorne family's campsite. The soldiers quickly noticed the mark on Meredith's arm and declared that she was the chosen one. By the time Solomon returned, the entire Crowthorne family had already been captured. Solomon said he would willingly go with them if they agreed to leave the family unharmed. However, Masked Rider set one condition: Solomon had to defeat one of his warriors. Because he had devoted himself to becoming a better man, Solomon could not accept the condition. As a result, one of the soldiers immediately executed Samuel before the horrified and heartbroken eyes of his family. Witnessing the suffering of the people who had once saved his life, Solomon could no longer remain silent. He unleashed all the rage he had suppressed for so long and charged into battle against the enemy. One by one, every enemy warrior was overwhelmingly defeated by Solomon. At that moment, Mr. Crowthorne and Edward also rose up to fight back. But neither of them was strong enough to stand against the enemy soldiers, and Edward was quickly killed while Mr. Crowthorne suffered severe injuries. Meanwhile, Masked Rider ordered his men to seize Meredith and flee on horseback. After a fierce battle, Solomon finally wiped out all the remaining enemies. By then, Mr. Crowthorne was already at death's door. He begged Solomon to promise that he would save Meredith at all costs, because it was also the only path that could lead Solomon's soul toward redemption. Moments later, Mr. Crowthorne drew his final breath. The pain completely shattered Solomon, and he chose to abandon his vow to stay away from violence in order to fulfill his promise. After collecting weapons from the fallen soldiers, Solomon mounted a horse and began tracking Masked Rider's trail. But after traveling only a short distance, two hidden soldiers suddenly ambushed him. Using the firearm he had taken earlier, Solomon swiftly killed both men in an instant. A short while later, Solomon caught up to another group of soldiers escorting a wagon full of prisoners. He quickly slaughtered them all with deadly sword strikes and freed every captive. However, Meredith was nowhere among them, which only deepened Solomon's anxiety. That night, he discovered an abandoned church and decided to stay there until morning. While praying, Solomon suddenly sensed someone attempting to ambush him from behind and reacted just in time. The mysterious man introduced himself as Michael and claimed to be a priest. Michael explained that Masked Rider and his army had ravaged this land, turning it into the desolate wasteland it had become. He also revealed that another figure stood behind Masked Rider, manipulating everything from the shadows. That being was named Malachi, an entity possessing terrifying dark powers. However, no one had ever seen Malachi in person because he had never once left his castle. At that moment, Solomon suddenly heard strange noises echoing up from the basement below. When he went down to investigate, he discovered countless terrifying vampires imprisoned beneath the church. Michael explained that they had once been ordinary people, but were transformed into monsters by Malachi's curse. That was why he lacked the courage to kill them himself. But while Solomon let his guard down, Michael suddenly shoved him into the basement and tightly locked the door behind him. It turned out that from the very beginning, the so-called priest had been putting on a deceptive act. In reality, he was a madman who lured unfortunate people there to feed the monsters below. At that moment, the vampires began frantically charging towards Solomon. Outnumbered and overwhelmed, he had no choice but to fight while desperately searching for a way to retreat. After a tense battle, Solomon finally discovered a hidden tunnel that allowed him to escape. But to his surprise, the moment he emerged outside, he encountered the same three bandits who had attacked him earlier. The only difference was that now they had been completely corrupted by Masked Rider's dark power. The bandits explained that they had just sent the corrupted priest straight to hell, and now it was Solomon's turn to follow him. With only a few swift strikes, Solomon quickly defeated two of the three bandits. He then interrogated the last survivor about Meredith's whereabouts. However, the man claimed that she was already dead, Hearing those words caused Solomon's fury to explode, and he immediately threw the bandit down into the basement to become prey for the monsters below. Believing that he had failed to keep his promise, Solomon fell into overwhelming despair and agony. He wandered into a tavern hoping to drown his sorrows. Their two former comrades named Henry and Telford recognized Solomon. They revealed that they were gathering forces to stand against Malachi and wanted Solomon to lead them. But having lost all motivation to fight, he refused their offer. Later that night, while Solomon and the others were asleep, they were suddenly ambushed by a group of strangers. The following morning, they were brought to an open field and realized that Masked Rider was behind everything. One by one, each of them was nailed to crosses for daring to oppose Malachi. Solomon himself barely resisted, seemingly having accepted his fate. Just then, a convoy transporting prisoners unexpectedly passed through the town. To everyone's shock, Meredith was still alive and imprisoned among the captives. As the convoy passed the execution ground, she immediately spotted Solomon hanging from the cross and desperately called out his name. Realizing that Meredith was still alive instantly restored Solomon's will to fight. He freed himself, but the violent fall to the ground left him dazed. The guards immediately rushed toward him, preparing to finish him off. But at the critical moment, Henry and the others arrived just in time and swiftly wiped out every last guard. Afterward, they brought Solomon back to a hidden base located inside a cave. There, an elderly woman treated his injuries. The moment he regained consciousness, Solomon immediately wanted to set out and rescue Meredith. However, everyone stopped him and urged him to wait until he had fully recovered. Furious, Solomon declared that he did not need anyone's help. But Henry and the others firmly insisted that they would fight alongside him whether he agreed or not. A short while later, the group began discussing a plan to end Malachi's existence once and for all. Long ago, he had merely been an ordinary man who traded his soul to the devil in exchange for dark powers. Henry explained that Malachi was currently hiding within Axmouth Castle, and if they wanted to stop him, they would have to go there. The moment Solomon heard the name Axmouth, he froze in shock because it was the castle belonging to his family, the place where he had grown up as a child. Desperate to uncover the truth behind everything, Solomon ordered everyone to prepare their weapons and immediately set out for the castle. Having once lived there, Solomon knew the entire layout inside. He easily guided his team into the fortress through a hidden tunnel. At that very moment, the evil witch also appeared within the castle. Solomon suddenly hurled his sword straight at the witch, catching her completely off guard and bringing her down instantly. The loud noise immediately drew the attention of the guards, triggering a fierce battle between both sides. Not long afterward, Masked Rider himself joined the fight, making the situation even more dangerous. Henry and Telford decided to stay behind and hold him off so Solomon could continue searching for Meredith. Solomon immediately charged deeper into the castle and found the prison area. After killing the guard, he quickly threw open the cells and freed the prisoners trapped inside. However, when he reached the final cell, Solomon still could not find Meredith and instead discovered an old man cowering in the corner. The man refused to leave and claimed that this place was his home. Those words made Solomon instantly realize that the man before him was none other than his own father. Solomon desperately tried to free him, but the chains binding him were forged from dark magic and could not be broken. In anguish, Solomon confessed that Marcus's death years ago had only been a tragic accident and that he had never intended to harm his brother. But his father then revealed that Marcus was actually still alive, leaving Solomon utterly stunned. It turned out that after the fall years ago, Marcus had not died but had instead suffered horrific injuries and fallen into a deep coma. Desperate to save his son, Solomon's father sought out Malachi in the hope that he could restore Marcus. And indeed, Malachi succeeded, but in exchange he used dark magic to transform Marcus into his loyal servant. Because his face had been horribly disfigured after the accident, Marcus was forced to hide it behind a mask at all times, which was why he became known as Masked Rider. Solomon could hardly believe that the ruthless masked warrior was actually his own brother. At that moment, their father was consumed with guilt over the tragedy he had unintentionally caused and begged Solomon to put an end to this nightmare. He also pleaded with Solomon to end his life so his soul could finally be freed from torment. Despite the unbearable pain, Solomon ultimately fulfilled his father's final wish. Meanwhile, Henry and the others were gradually being overwhelmed and forced to retreat. Even so, they continued fighting in order to buy Solomon more time. A short while later, Solomon entered the main hall and discovered Meredith imprisoned inside an iron cage. Meredith immediately warned him that it was all a trap, but Solomon did not care. At that moment, Malachi finally revealed himself. Solomon instantly flew into a rage upon seeing him seated in the chair that had once belonged to his father. Without hesitation, he charged forward to attack, but Malachi quickly used magic to vanish from sight. No matter how much Solomon challenged him, Malachi refused to reveal himself again. Left with no other choice, Solomon turned his attention toward rescuing Meredith. But suddenly, Masked Rider burst out from behind and struck him with a devastating blow. Unwilling to fight his own brother, Solomon repeatedly tried to awaken whatever humanity remained inside Marcus. However, all his efforts were futile because Marcus had already fallen completely under the control of darkness. With no other option left, Solomon was forced to raise his sword and continue fighting. During the brutal clash, he managed to knock Masked Rider's mask away and froze in horror upon seeing Marcus's horribly disfigured face. In the end, after a fierce battle, Solomon finally defeated his brother and freed Marcus from the control of the dark forces. At that very moment, Malachi used Meredith's pure blood to open the gates of hell and summon a gigantic monster. He immediately ordered the creature to attack Solomon, and it was then that Solomon realized the nightmare could only end if the devil claimed his soul. In order to keep his promise to save Meredith, Solomon ultimately chose to sacrifice himself. Thanks to his sacrifice, the gates of hell quickly closed, dragging Malachi and the monstrous creature back into the darkness with them. Solomon's death completely shattered Meredith, leaving her consumed by grief and despair. Yet moments later, Solomon suddenly awakened again, leaving Meredith unable to believe her own eyes. It turned out that Mr. Crowthorne had been right all along. By willingly sacrificing himself to keep his promise, Solomon had finally earned redemption for his soul. And with that, the film comes to an end. See you again in the next stories.